welcome to Co-Parenting Confessions, the podcast where we dive into the real about co-parenting. We're not holding anything back. We are educating and we're having fun. And today I have some amazing professional guests on the show today that are going to give us some insight into the world of family court. And we're going to kind of dive in and talk about it from a couple of different angles. So we're excited today for this amazing conversation. Do not forget to subscribe to Co-Parenting Confessions. So find the button somewhere on your screen and click it right now so that people know what's going on and you can share it and you get these notifications when we have a new episode. So without further ado, I would like to welcome my guests today. Thank you guys so much for coming. We have, oh my gosh, I feel like this is a huge drum roll because I have worked with both of these men in this space in a couple of different capacities. So I'm so excited. So today we have Clarence Patterson, who is a family law attorney. And then we also have Zak Chesson, who is a mediator, a family mediator and evaluator. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what their roles are, and we're going to dive in. So we don't want to assume that anybody knows anything. And so we're going to just start with, tell us a little bit about what does it mean to be in the roles that you are in. And so if we can start first with Clarence, what is a family law attorney? What do you do?
Well, thanks for having me.
Yes.
So I'm a family law attorney, been one since 2018, and I help individuals kind of navigate the process to sometimes get reunited with their kids, help get like parenting time schedules, get custody established through mediation, through the court system, just kind of be their advocate, their voice, because I'm the person who speaks up in court and drafts all the documents for them.
Yes. Oh, I love it.
Yeah,
be the advocate in their voice.
Yeah, do pretty much anything except for like actually meet the children.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know. That's really good to know. It helps people to recognize kind of like what your place is in the whole process. So that's awesome. Zak, family mediation and evaluation. What is that?
Well, specifically in Hennepin County, where we are in Minneapolis, we are the only county or the only judicial district in the county or in the state that has a public family mediation and evaluation. Everywhere else across the state of Minnesota, it's private. But my office, we do two different things. One is alternative dispute resolution, which is mediation and early neutral evaluations, and I'll get into that in a moment. And then the other piece of it is we do full custody and parenting time evaluations. And so the alternative dispute resolution piece is exactly what it sounds like. The courts really wants folks, and I think the legislature too, wants folks to be empowered to make their own decisions for their families. They don't want them to be adversarial. They don't want them in a lot of litigation. And I don't think families want to be in that. But when they're separating, things are really tough. So coming in for mediation, trying to work with somebody like me or, my wonderful colleagues, try to address the issues up front. Whether or not changes need to be made. So many changes happen in families that you can't predict. And so deviating from what they've been doing and trying to help them find something that's going to work for their children in particular is what we focus on. Early neutral evaluations, the key word there is early. When people are first separating, they kind of have two choices. They can go the litigation route or they can try to resolve their issues. And thankfully, most families are able to resolve their issues up front. But in early neutral evaluation, I'm always partnered with a female colleague. So there's no allegations of gender bias. So it's always two people. And we hear the family story. We hear from both parties. If they have attorneys, their attorneys can help guide them. And then we take that information and filter it through the 12 best interest factors that are by statute. And we give them some feedback and recommendations about what we think that would happen if they went through the entire litigation process in order to try to get them to focus on co-parenting and moving forward instead of being stuck in this process that nobody really wants to be in.
Yes.
So that's the alternative dispute resolution part. When parties, though, just aren't able to come to those agreements for whatever reason, then there are full custody and parenting time evaluations. Like I said, there's 12 best interest factors. My colleagues and I, we gather information. We meet with the parties. We do meet with children. We do home observations, see kids at school, talk to therapists, teachers, doctors, anybody who knows the family, gather records, and then write reports and make recommendations about a children's best interest to the court.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. There's so much that goes into supporting parents in this space, right? Like when they're divorcing. For me personally, I will share, excuse me, when I got into this work, a big part of it for me was how do we support parents who aren't actually divorcing? Because I've never been married. And so for me, when my son's father and I were separating, there wasn't a system to support us. We didn't really know outside of our friends and family, who do we talk to help us make sense of how we're feeling and what actually needs to happen going forward to make sure that our son had some stability and structure. And so for me, I thought, well, where do we go? What do we do? What supports are available? And I love that you guys are in these spaces because families are able to kind of tap in and they don't have to be divorcing necessarily. There are, options. There are options available to them. So the thing that I want to tap into a little bit is as we talk about evaluation, and this is a space that both of you kind of know a little bit about, like what these evaluations look like. Zak, can you tell us, like, if there's a family that's struggling, right, and you're trying to help them figure out custody and evaluation happens, what does that process then look like and how can they best navigate that?
Sure. So, we're going to presume that it's a mom and a dad, just for the sake of argument. But there are plenty of cases where it's, one of the family members, one of the parents passes away, and grandma or grandpa get involved and file for custody. Or it's a mom and a dad and a dad. We see all kinds of cases. But for the most part, it's, mom and dad. And basically, when we get a new case, when we get a family who's not able to resolve their issues through alternative dispute resolution, immediately we ask them to contact us. And that's kind of how I check to see how invested some people are. Sometimes that email goes out and literally a minute later I get a phone call, like they've been waiting for the email, saying that I'm the evaluator and please contact me. Other times it's like 2 weeks and I haven't heard anything. So it just depends. But initially we do initial interviews with both parents separately. Or that's at least how I do it. I feel like I should do a disclaimer here. The opinions are that I'm giving today are mine and my own. They are not indicative of Hennepin County Family Mediation Evaluation nor AFCC Minnesota. These are my own. So now that I got that out of the way, meet with both parents. And those initial meetings are long. They could be 2-3 hours. I mean, sometimes they've gone 4 or 5 hours actually, because I'm really wanting to understand folks' lives and where they're coming from, and not just, hey, tell me about the worst part that's happened and what's happening right now. But like, I want to know about the parties' childhoods. Because oftentimes you talk about not having education or not knowing where to go. There's not a lot of education on how to parent, unfortunately, or what healthy behaviors are, what healthy conflict is like. So I will go back and kind of deconstruct somebody's life. I want to know about their childhood, how they were disciplined, if they grew up in a 2-parent home, if they had support, things like that. And then, I'll learn about the history of their relationship. Some families, the parents have been married for 20 years. Other families, it was a one-night stand, and just a chance encounter that produced a child, and everything in between. So gathering that information and then looking at the court record, looking at any court involvement that they've had. Unfortunately, plenty of times there's criminal involvement or criminal history. If folks are seeing therapists, providers, if the kids have any special needs, if the parents have any special needs, talking to those providers, getting those records, really getting a comprehensive overview of what the family's experienced. And then, like I said earlier, I'll meet with kids. I'll do home observations. I'm not there to judge parenting. I'm not there to say somebody's doing right or wrong. I'm just there to observe what the relationship looks like, how comfortable the child is, whether or not they're in any distress. Kind of what's an hour in your life like? How does this work? If the children are old enough, I'll talk to them in school. I love talking to kids at school. It's one of my favorite things to do as far as work is concerned. That I get a real unfiltered, feedback from kids, because kids, when mom is around the corner in the garage or dad's up in the bathroom or whatever, they're still kind of guarded. I'll see a kid at home and very guarded, very quiet, and I'll get to school, blah, 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 blah. Let me tell you what's happening. And then gathering all this information and really analyzing it, trying to understand it in the context of, if there's domestic violence, if there's mental health issues, if there's chemical dependency issues, make the right recommendations for the families to get support, but then ultimately make custody and parenting time recommendations.
Yeah.
And I love my job. I think it's great. But there's something really valuable about trying to have people understand, look, when your kid's 30 years old, they're not going to care what the custody labels were. They're going to care, were they encouraged by you? Were they supported by you? Were they given love from their extended family? Did they feel safe in your care? That's what's going to matter to them. Your kids, when they're 30, they're not going to add up the time that they had with both of you.
True,
And like,
true.
hey, I was with mom 20 more hours than you.
Right.
That was really unfair.
Yeah.
That's not, but the court needs, the law says that this has to happen.
That's how it has to go. Yeah.
So that's what we need to provide.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Now, one of the things that I would love to tap into a little bit, and Clarence, if you could speak to this, is like, how severe does a family case have to be for them to need your services or your support, or even the ways that you tap into the evaluation and, that kind of space? What does it typically look like?
Yeah, so a lot of my cases are really high conflict, although there are some easier cases.
Yeah.
Like there's some people who come to me and they're like close to an agreement. They co-parent fairly well with the other parent, and they're just at a point where there's something small that they can't agree on, getting through the process. And I tell them, you can hire me, or you can kind of spend your own time figuring out this through the case, figuring out how to do it. You can always represent yourself. And a lot of people would much rather just go to work, focus on their family, focus on their kid, try to heal from this, whether it's divorce or separation or what have you. And so they just rather pay an attorney, pay me to kind of take over for that. But for me, like, my kind of reputation, I guess, is a lot of people come to me for really high conflict cases, where there's allegations or of like domestic violence, lots of drug abuse, things like that. So a good amount of my cases do go through evaluations. Generally speaking, there's not an evaluation needed if both parents if there's not allegations of abuse or anything like that. So when they're kind of going through the evaluation, one of the things that I tell my clients is like, this is your time to put away your pride, right? Because you're going to have some strange person asking all the questions that you do not want to answer. They're going to be wanting to talk to your doctors, your mental health professionals, your family, your friends. They're going to want to talk to your kid at school. Like, you have to put your pride away, because if you're going in there guarded of like, well, I don't need to tell you these things, well, then the inclination from the evaluator is going to be, well, what are you hiding?
Yeah, I was just going to say that. So you're hiding something, and we need to get to the bottom of that. Yeah.
And so I really tell them that you have to put down your pride here. And that's kind of what co-parenting is anyway.
Oh my God.
Right. So you have to put down your pride. You're going to have to realize that it's for the betterment of your child and even of themselves. So yeah, that's kind of one of the things that I kind of preach. And then the other thing is, if they're so guarded, what's going to happen is this report's going to come out, and then they're going to say, oh, but it's wrong for all these reasons, right? And it's too late. The report's already done. This evaluator has put tens of hours, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 hours into this. And now you want to come and tell them, oh, well, this doctor that I'm seeing and I've passed all these drug tests, and it's no longer an issue. And so you have to be upfront, forthcoming. And if there was if I have clients that they did have some sort of problems with substance abuse, it's about preemptively getting them in some sort of programs so they can show that they've moved on, because what you were in the past is not necessarily what you are in the present or the future. And if it's the other reverse, where the other parent is having issues, it's about highlighting those and how my client is kind of the better fit to take and navigate some of the issues for the kid.
I love that you just took me down a path in my mind. So first and foremost, I just have to say, like, I am so excited that we got two Black men in here having this conversation.
Well,
listen,
brown, Mexican.
Okay, brown. So, but my thing is, I want to talk about men of color and how they're very guarded at times with the details. We see this happen a lot, and I would love to speak to any advice that we might share or any examples that you might have of where you saw that there was a man that was just really holding that pride, right? And the cards so close to his chest that some things maybe didn't happen in his favor the way that they could have because of that. Because I see that happen often, almost every day in my space, where they're in this kind of adversarial, toxic kind of a space, and mom has a ton of information and allegations, and dad is just like, I just don't want to argue. I'm throwing my hands up, and he has so much, you can just see the weight of the world on his shoulders, but he doesn't believe in sharing. He doesn't want to talk about the process. Any tips or advice we would give for that particular type of space?
Here's where I approach it. And this again is my disclaimer. These are my own. I like to think I treat every parent the same through the process. But I have a healthy skepticism of the court system in general. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of a paradox that I work in the court system that I also don't always trust. And I try to connect and say, look, this is your opportunity to tell your story and try to reach some resolution so that some judge who doesn't know you, who's only going to read things off a piece of paper and maybe see you for a few hours in their courtroom, doesn't come to some other conclusion. And really trying to connect and say, I'm skeptical of this too. Mm-hmm. I'm skeptical of this system, but this is the one we have. And so let's try to make the best of it. I feel like that has worked with enough people and not just people of color. I mean, Mexican, Latinx folks, we've got our own things being guarded about immigration status, number one. Like we don't want to disclose too much. Moms not wanting to disclose about domestic violence because they think dad might get deported. So every community has their own thing. There's a healthy distrust of government in suburban communities, that have a little bit higher income levels. And I get all of that. But my response too sometimes is, look, I didn't come knocking on your door asking to see what's happening behind your behind the curtains. Y'all came to court and asked for us, and here we are. So let's kind of make this work together. But I think if I can help somebody understand that it is a difficult process, but you can make it a whole lot easier on yourself and just try to make that personal connection, then there's much more of a willingness to open up.
I love that. Clarence, would you add anything at all to that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the differences that I notice between my male and female clients, right? My female clients, I can just ask open-ended questions. It's a lot easier because they can answer the question. They know they're much more open, and generally speaking, right? When I first started years ago, I used to ask my male clients, and the vast majority of my male clients are Black men, right? And I used to ask, are you the victim of domestic violence? And everyone would say no. Right? Yep. Now I ask the follow-up question. Do you understand that as a man, you can be the victim of domestic violence? And then it sometimes clicks to them. Yes. Because I've had cases in the past where I'd ask that question, they'd say no. And then they're telling me later on, months down the line, oh, there's a video of she's hitting me. Yep. It's that's domestic violence. And so I think it's a little bit of a stigma, especially for men, who have a fear of calling the police in these instances, right? Because they're especially if they're big, strong-looking guy, the police come, who knows what's going to happen? Somebody's going to jail at night, right? And so getting people to open up, especially men, is difficult, and I just have to ask a lot more questions, and I, recognize that as women just generally give. Share a little bit more. Yeah.
If I could just a suggestion here, frame it as domestic abuse and not domestic violence, because there are plenty of types of domestic abuse that fall under the factors that aren't physical violence. And some of the worst cases I've seen of domestic abuse that have had the most tremendous impact on generally moms, but not always, and children in particular, the perpetrator never laid a hand on them. It was financial. It was financial, emotional, psychological. generally a lot of religious, cases where there's like a fundamentalist, and that's across all religions. Yeah. But some of the worst ones that I've seen, again, incidents of like legitimate domestic violence or domestic abuse. I just contradicted myself. Domestic abuse. Hand was never laid, never left a bruise.
I love that you share that. And then just also to the point of the difference between the domestic violence and domestic abuse is another really good point, is that when families are in these spaces, terminology is different. Things are changing, the way we're talking, what someone interprets one thing to mean versus what, it means to someone else. And so it could be a really, really intimidating space to be in. And so both of you are in spaces where you're able to help families to navigate what that feels like. The other thing that I want to talk a little bit about, and I think a little tinge of it could be in there when we're talking about domestic abuse, is that what do we do when one parent is weaponizing the other by utilizing the system? And we see that happen quite a bit, right? Where it's like, you're not doing what I want you to do, so I'm going to court. And I want to talk a little bit about what you see in that space, or if you have any examples of anything that you've seen.
Yeah, I've got some examples. I've had a client once before who had an order for protection against him, right? And he wasn't represented when he got it. There wasn't an exception where he could pay for his kid to like enroll in activities. He sent the mom some money, and she called the police on him, and he got arrested. And
for sending money. Yeah,
for their child. And he hired me. We eventually got that kind of straightened out. But how you kind of navigate those things it's just really tough, because these are people who are like bound by some sort of order that can become obsolete, right? Like your kid needs money, your kid needs food, and so weaponizing that, it's really tough. And generally I have to tell my clients, like, you have to be ready to go to court. Like if you have somebody who's just completely irrational on the other side, and you try to like be kind and gracious towards them, and they just are not hearing it, then you have to be prepared to go to court, or you're going to be in a situation where you're just going to get walked over and over again. Like, right, as an attorney, at least, I don't have this magical power to like make the other person kind.
Yes. And usually, this is so funny. When I started the Price Dynamic, I just thought, I'm going to work with families that are similar to mine. Like, we decided our relationship is not what we want anymore, but we knew fundamentally that we were going to be parents, and we wanted what was best for our child, and we were going to figure out what that looked like. And so to team with each other was never... And there was never an idea that we wouldn't do what it would take to do that, right? And then I realized that when you're working with people in this space, there is almost always someone who says, it is not me, it is the other person. And if you fix them or tell them what to do, we wouldn't have this problem at all. It's almost always the case where the finger is pointed. And I wonder, when we talk about like the mediation space, what does that look like, and how do you navigate that finger pointing? And
so there are different types of mediation, and my office uses the facilitative model, which basically means we're helping couples or parties. We're helping facilitate a conversation between them. We're not giving evaluative feedback. We're not gathering records. We're not asking, for who's right, who's wrong. Let me see the emails. Let me talk to the kids. It's 2 hours. You have some issues. You two clearly can't talk to each other, so I'm going to help you have a conversation. In that space, once the finger pointing, like, I just remind them, like, look, you can tell me whatever you want to tell me. I'm going to take you at face value, but that's not what we're trying to accomplish today. Now, there is another type of an evaluation that's evaluative mediation, where the mediator would get information, would talk to providers, would look at the text messages and the emails. That's a lot more significant, and it's offered, but that's just not something that our office does. We want to keep those conversations, and we want to limit it. In an evaluative mediation, there's more opportunity for things to escalate and the conflict to really come through. But what's interesting is when I'm doing a facilitative mediation and that finger point starts, I'll just sit back and let them go for a minute and be like, oh, okay. Because now, and I'll reflect back to them.
Absolutely.
I'm a 47-year-old professional.
Yep.
That was tough for me for the 7 minutes I just let you go. How do you think your kid feels when they see you doing that?
Absolutely.
And reframing it like that oftentimes leads to a little bit of, oh, okay, the light bulb goes off. Yeah, let's figure out where they're going to school next year. That's why we came here in the first place, but really trying to get them to be forward thinking, like honoring the past, recognize it happened, but like, hey, look, I know that was an awful affair that happened 3 years ago, and I know that you're still with that person that you had an affair with, but what does that have to do with your kid needs to figure out where they're going to school in 3 months? Can we resolve that? And again, reframing it, bringing it back to the children, most of the time works.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. I mean, it's real. I can't tell you how many times in coaching sessions or just even in the supervised visitation space that when you do that reflective listening, when you share, mirroring back, this is what I just heard, that light bulb goes off. Like people get so caught up, right, in how they feel and or wanting to be right. Mm-hmm. And in the process of wanting to be right, we forget how wrong we're being to those around us.
You know what I found, and this is more an evaluation than mediation, but it happens in mediation too. Sometimes folks don't have the money for a therapist.
Yes.
They don't have a really good support system. They don't have, just a homie that they can talk to and be like, hey, so I'm the person that they get something off their chest. And sometimes if I just shut up and listen and they get through it, then they put it out into the universe and I could just sometimes see the shoulders drop.
Yes.
And then, okay, I got it out. Finally, somebody listened to me. They don't need to agree with me, but I got it out there. Now let's figure out what the issues are.
That's
and
so
sometimes
real. Just
active listening and letting them get through it can really help facilitate some movement in these things.
Yeah, that's kind of how Clarence and I met. Because when he talks about, having a lot of high conflict cases, we actually started to see families going kind of back and forth through the evaluation process, but then being really stuck when it came to any type of court space because they're using that space to vent. Mm-hmm. They're using that space to share what's happening with them. And then they're therefore spending more money than necessary and wasting a lot of time by not doing it in the appropriate places. Mm-hmm. So I love that you said that because it is about that active listening. And just as a tip for families is like, you might want to try mediation before you have to get into the space where now you're spending money to tell Clarence about the affair.
Yep. And
that happened.
And not that I'm trying to take anything out of your pocket, believe me, but I'll say to parents, do you want to save for your kid to go to college or your attorney's kid to go to college? Because that's kind of where you're at right now. If you keep going down this road, you're whittling funds away that can be for them. Not that their attorney's kids don't deserve to go to college, but I mean, if again, reframing it, just like little tips here and there, and then the light bulb goes off. But unfortunately, some people are so hung up on being right, having the last word, like being justified somewhere. Absolutely. I'll tell parents all the time, look, you can get a court order that says you were right about everything. There can be detailed findings of fact that you were right about every single thing that you presented, but the order's not actually going to go your way, and your relationship with your kid is kind of shot. So is the findings of fact that important? Does that mean that much to you that you have to sacrifice a functional relationship with your co-parent or a decent relationship with your kid?
Yeah.
Some folks it is, but most folks it's not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What are the things that you've seen or heard that just sometimes make you want to shake a person? Where you're just like, you know what? I cannot believe that you can't get over that thing or past that thing. We're just right there. And what happens? What do we see?
The one thing that is really just when they have like a 10 or 11-year-old child and they're like, oh, well, they don't want to see their other parent, right? My question is okay, well, why, right?
Yeah.
And when the parents don't even have an answer why, they're just like, oh, they just don't want to go over there, right? And I'm like, I have to explain like, hey, maybe that parent is making them do homework. Maybe that parent is making them do chores.
Yeah.
Maybe it's abuse, right? You need to be able to ask those questions. And it's just far too many people don't want to have these conversations with their kid and want their kids to pick
Yes.
the parent in the custody. And like I always tell them, like when I was a teenager, I went to my parents and said, yeah, I'm not going to school anymore, right?
Thank you. Thank you. That's my number one example.
And they told me, well, you can get out of the house and have a nice life, right? So I was back in school on Monday, right? So it's like, well, what do you do in these situations when your kids tell you, yeah, they don't want to go to school.
They don't want
they
to
don't want to do their homework.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to eat like regular food. Like you have to step up and be a parent and tell them what to do. And if they don't want to go to the other parent's house, you need, like, if I'm going to tell the judge and sell the judge on this,
absolutely,
I have to be able to tell them that there's a good reason other than, they just really don't want to go.
Yeah. Zach, to piggyback on that, when you hear that from children, right? So you're in the school setting and now they're talkative and they're willing to share more than what they would share while they were at home with mom or dad. And you hear those things. I don't want to go over my other parent's house. What are typically the things that the children are sharing or saying that is happening that might cause some of that?
I would say the number one is that a parent repartnered and they have the new partner has kids and there just hasn't been that good integration. That's generally the number one thing. It's pretty rare that I encounter a kid that absolutely doesn't want to see their parents. Yep. I mean, I've known of kids that have been, this was more when I was a guardian ad litem than a custody evaluator. But I saw the police reports. I saw the child protection reports. I saw the pictures of the bruises and the cuts and the welts. And they still wanted a relationship. And that tells me that there was at some point good attachment, that the parent who was abusive did some good things, especially when the child was really, really young. So there's attachment. Generally, when kids, in my experience, when kids really reject a parent, it's when that proper attachment didn't happen. A parent was incarcerated. A parent was deployed in the military for the first 2 or 3 years of a child's life. A parent had a drug or alcohol issue and grandma and grandpa did more of the work. When the attachment doesn't happen at a really, really young age, that's when you can get to an 11, 12, 13-year-old, like, I'm not close to them.
Yeah.
But if that attachment happened, most of the time, kids, they might have their petty reasons. Dad's more strict. Mom works late and I've got to feed myself, so it's easier at dad's. A lot of times kids, especially when we're talking preteens and teens, they want things to be as easy as possible because they're dealing with a lot of stuff with school and peers and, just going through that developmental phase that it's just easier to be at mom's.
Right.
It's closer to the school. It's not that dad did anything wrong necessarily. It's just it makes my life easier to be in this space.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that. There is something really special about talking to our children when they're going through these things, when it comes to the division in a household or deciding which parent to be with and live with, and just getting to the real nuts and bolts of how are they feeling? What is their experience? And a lot of times our children want to take on what one of the other parent is feeling, right? They just adopt all of those emotions, everything that they're hearing. Sometimes those conversations are inappropriate and they feel the need to choose a side. And so putting them in the middle versus putting your child first is really a hard space for them to be in. But I love that you mentioned that the older that they get, it is about their convenience. A lot of times children do want to be where my friends are, where I'm closer to my sports, I'm closer to school, or where I get to stay up later or where I get to eat whatever I want to eat.
That happens in intact homes too.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
Like I did not, my kid's 20. I don't think I saw him when he was 15 to 17. Like I saw him at his games, saw him when he came home to eat. But other than that, he was ghost, but that's developmentally appropriate, and so that happens throughout families. But it can hurt a parent a little bit more when they know that they're like, it's two separate homes, and they want to find a reason. Well, the reason is thousands of years of development, not what happened to you 6 months ago.
Yeah. It's so good. In the coaching space, we get a lot of, again, the parents that one person wants to be right. And, the other person is constantly feeling like they're needing to defend themselves. How do we, as outside family, friends, support parents that we see navigating these spaces. They're in family mediation, they're working through evaluation, they have court coming up. It's so important that the support system around them is not fueling or feeding into the negativity or the drama. How can we give some advice to family members that are helping and or supporting families that are going through one of these two cases or spaces?
I think you have to, I would tell family members to respect the parent and their decision, as they know best what's for their kid.
Mm-hmm.
Because I get a lot of times where I have these conversations with my client. We talk about what's appropriate, what the goal is, what's best for their kid, right? We leave this meeting, they go home, they talk to their parents, their sisters, their brothers, their aunts, their uncles, and then they call me and it's completely changed, right? And I think family members forget, like, the parent, say mom or dad here, that's their child, right?
Yes.
And the parents, the grandparents are still seeing their adult child as
their child.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in reality this is all about that 8, 9, 10-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And so the current parent here should be the one to like guide the ship, and they should respect those decisions and say, hey, yeah, that's good. Let's go for that. But when you have like 1,000 cooks in the kitchen trying to tell everybody what to do, so many parents just get lost, and then they're trying to please their family and to make the other person suffer when it just gets lost what's best for the kid.
Yeah.
I'm going to answer that question just with both parents and not the extended family. Trying to highlight a children's strengths and say, both of you did that. Both of you made sure that your kid is on the honor roll. Both of you made sure that your kid got to practice and made the team. Both of you got them to their piano lessons and recitals. Like, it wasn't a one or the other. Like, sometimes it is, but even a parent who maybe doesn't have the same amount of time, but encourages, supports, is at the functions, that's just as important. I talk to people a lot about the quality of time versus the quantity of time. You can have a 50-50 schedule and be on your iPad, your kid's upstairs playing video games, you're not really connecting, or you can have a 75-25, but you got that 25. You're at the museum every weekend. You're at the zoo. You're taking them to families. You're exposing them to cultural events. You're showing up to their games or their recitals or whatever. Those kids, there's a lot of research behind this. Those kids have longer lasting, better outcomes academically, socially, health-wise, than kids who have 50-50 schedules and are really detached from their parents, And so promoting, no matter what the schedule looks like, promoting the strengths and the fact that you both work together to make sure that your children have these strengths, I think that can really help a lot of families too.
I love that you share that. So important. The quality of time. It's not about the quantity always. So for me, to kind of go into our own lives a little bit, now that I'm in this space and I see so much of what's happening with families, I'm like storing so many situations and scenarios that now I look at my son a certain way. Now I'm trying to educate him ahead of time, because like he will be someone's father and then I will be the crazy grandma who's over here like, wait, that's my child. That's not that grown man. That's my child, So I want to tap into a little bit about, based on what you've seen in your role, how are you making different decisions in your own life, or how has it shaped some of your own relationships because of now what you see playing out in your professional space? Clarence has a nice little smile going.
Well, I'll say it's kind of backfired on me a little bit, especially with COVID, because we were all in the house, my wife and I working from home, my son doing school from home. They always knew about what I did for a living, but I don't think they ever really heard it. And so they heard me for years, just like, oh, that's what he does. Like, they had a vague idea, but not like the nuts and bolts of it. And for me, sometimes like we'll be having a family discussion about whatever, and it'll be like, don't talk to us like your clients. Don't talk that, and I've heard this from other mediators. I've heard this from therapists, like, it's like you're almost a victim of your profession
Yeah.
because they think they're, but we make it work. We've always made it work.
Yeah.
I mean, our son is successful. He's in college. He's playing sports. He's a wonderful kid. But it's just like sometimes I can't just, if it sounds at all like I'm bringing work to the table, then it gets tuned out because it's like, oh, you're professionally speaking. You're not like emotionally speaking.
Yes.
And I'm like, I'm trying to do both. I did learn some things at work that might be helpful, but I also see your perspective too. And this isn't some random family. This is what's happening under our roof, and I have to engage at that level too.
Yes. I've been told many times, do not motivational interview me.
Yep.
Like, we don't need right now. Or like, did you forget you're not at work? And it's like, but wait, this is actually who I am. Like, which is probably why I do the work that I do. What is the situation for you, Clarence? How has it informed or shaped?
Yeah. So, I got friends, family, whatever, going through divorces, custody and stuff. And they'll come to me and ask me questions. And I've learned to now ask, which answer do you want? Do you want the attorney one, or do you want like your friend, your brother? Like, which one are you looking for? Usually it's the attorney one, which is kinda...
They want some free advice.
Yeah.
So you have a separate billing system for them?
It's always free. Try to different hats, right? Because as an attorney, like I can't be too emotional about it, right? Nobody's hiring their attorney to like shed tears with them, right?
Yeah.
I always try to ask that question of, because we get some messy stuff.
Yeah. It's real. I have to ask that question quite a bit about, like, do you want me to just listen, or do you want me to help you solve? Like, are you looking for solutions right now, or are you just needing to be heard? And because I'm a very solution focused person, so as soon as I start hearing things, I start strategizing. So I have to, make sure that I ask that question often.
I don't think you do the work that we do if you're not a fixer, a helper. Like that's what we were called to do, in the service industry. My side job, I'm in the service industry. Like I serve people. Yeah. It's what motivates me to do what I do. And it's really hard to turn that off.
It is.
Really hard to turn that off.
It is about who you are. It is in you. So if we wanted to give people some information about where do they start, right? When is it a good time to do mediation? When is it a good time to contact an attorney?
I want to take a step back from that.
Yeah.
I think we as a society do a horrible job of educating people in a billion different ways, but in the family court space, for example, when my son was born, my wife and I didn't get married until he was 7. I didn't know until I became a guardian ad litem that I did not have custody of my son.
Absolutely.
Like, I signed the recognition of parentage, I signed the birth certificate, but that gave me rights, but not custody. Yep. I had no idea. And like, I'm pretty educated, and it's just like, so many people don't know the most basic, like if you're unmarried in the state of Minnesota, mom automatically has sole legal and sole physical custody. Right. You have to come to court, and it doesn't have to be adversarial. You can come together. I had no idea. And so I feel like either at a doctor's office, a class at school, I know some schools are doing this, but there has to be it would be helpful if there were a priority on educating people. Yeah. Because I think if people knew this stuff up front, it could avoid a whole lot of conflict. The education piece of it could allow people to come to the Family Justice Center together, go to the self-help desk, and do all the paperwork. And then it doesn't have to be adversarial in that way. So that's just my little PSA. And it's something that I want to do in my career, is get the message out there, that this is how it works. But outside of that, once you have a conflict, I think unless there's significant domestic abuse, or you're dealing with somebody who has people who have mental health issues, diagnoses, they can be wonderful parents if they're taking their meds, seeing their therapist, but some don't, and there are circumstances where it's better to go the court route, I think, just to have somebody oversee the process. But sometimes it's just hurt and frustration, but we can put that to the side and work together. And that's where I think mediation is really, really helpful. Getting in right away, trying to resolve the issues. What I really appreciate about our office is as of January 1st of this year, all our services are free for Hennepin County residents. Not that they were super expensive before, but they're free for everybody now. And I would just suggest, as soon as you see not even if you're in a good relationship and unmarried, come take care of that stuff. Just get it out of the way. I've seen so many parents who did everything great for 10 years, no issues whatsoever, but never came to court, never put anything on paper. Then dad gets a new girlfriend. Mom loses a job, needs extra child support. Something happens that just kind of throws everything off. And then everything that they've worked for 10 years is not, because there's nothing on paper and nothing's been established, and they're upset with each other and they're letting their emotions guide them instead of what's best for their kid.
Yeah. No, that's really, really good. What would you add, Clarence? Anything?
Yeah, generally my answer is the sooner the better. I get people come in for consults for all types of reasons, right? All different stages, whether they got a 12-year-old kid, whether their significant other is pregnant. And generally I say now is the best time, right? There is one exception that I always find is when there's a married couple and they're in marriage counseling and one person wants to hire an attorney. I tell them, no, you need to be focused on your marriage. And if you're trying to fix it, fix your marriage.
Fix it.
Yeah. That just from my perspective, you can't be in marriage counseling 1 foot in. Either you go in or you go out. And if you're going to hire an attorney and you're married, you just need to say my marriage is over with and I'm moving on. But as far as if you're single, well, not single, if you are have a child and you're not married, the sooner the better. And it doesn't necessarily have to be super adversarial. You can come hire an attorney like myself and say, hey, I had this conversation with my, significant other, the mother or the father of my child, and we want to just put this in writing in case things go haywire down the road. We're in a good situation right now. People do that, and that's kind of the good thing to do because you're preemptively figuring it out, as opposed to trying to figure out when things go haywire. Somebody loses that job, somebody gets the new significant other.
Yep.
Because, the saying the wheels of justice move slow, it's like an understatement. So if something happens, say this month, you're not going to get it resolved for another 8, 9, 10, 12 months down the line. So you might as well just take care of it before it even becomes an issue.
And that's a great way to sell mediation.
Yeah.
Look, you two in this 2 hours that we got can figure this all out, or you can wait for that court order that might not come for 6, 7, 8 months.
Yeah.
That will probably say something similar to what you could figure out today. So let's just knock it out. That really motivates people.
Yeah. That is 100% real. And I love that you're both sharing. And I want to make sure that people really get that both of these spaces can be preventative. They don't always have to be a reactionary type of a thing. Everything doesn't have to be the shit hits the fan. And so now we have to try to fix it. You can think ahead. And you can start to hear about what's happening in other people's lives or your family or your friends and things that that have happened for them. And if you're hey, I don't want that to be us, you can utilize an attorney, you can utilize mediation to plan for some of those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's so good.
I think I have to remind myself, I saw statistics somewhere, over half of divorces, I don't know if this includes custody when parents aren't married, but at least over half of divorces in Minnesota settle amicably. And I don't see the settling amicably,
right.
Especially in the evaluative space. I see everything hitting the fan and the worst of the worst, but I have to check myself and most people figure this out. Most people figure it out on their own or with the help of a mediator or an attorney. They never see a judge, or they only see a judge when they're submitting it and they're put under oath and, that they affirm that they agree to these things. It usually works out, and that keeps me hopeful, that the families that I'm working with aren't the majority. The majority can figure this out on their own.
Yeah. I thank you guys so much for being here. This, I cannot think of a better way to end, is in really just saying that it doesn't always go bad. And we might over, the media and all of these different things kind of sensationalize the drama, the baby mama, baby daddy drama.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't always happen that way. It doesn't have to be that way. And there are real supports available to families. And again, that they don't have to be this reactionary support or space. There's alternatives to helping work through some of those emotions and feelings and really getting some stuff on paper that needs to happen.
Absolutely.
I want to leave you guys the opportunity to share. How do people get a hold of your services, or what is it that they might need to do if they need family mediation or if they are looking for an attorney? How do they reach you? What should they do?
Well, to get a hold of me, you could just, there's my website there up on the screen. You can always just Google and should pop up if my marketing company's doing their job still. And offer free consults. So you can always just give me a call and we can sit down and talk. Like I said, sooner the better. But at any stage in the game, willing to sit down and talk with anybody.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm a public employee, so I'm not soliciting business.
Yep.
Business comes to me.
Yep.
You can't, I think maybe in a mediation space, you can request me specifically, but if you go to, Hennepin County Family Mediation and Evaluation, there's a self-mediation referral space on there. I really encourage people to try to mediate their issues before going to court. And you can request me as a mediator specifically, but outside of that, my cases are assigned to me.
Yep.
I'm not soliciting business. Yep. What I will say, though, I do want to make a little plug because I actually lead 40-hour mediation training twice a year with my wonderful colleagues, Jennifer Prax and Kate Stevens. It's 40 hours, it's 6 days. But if you have any interest in becoming a family mediator, I offer training that can get you put on the roster for the state of Minnesota, so you can do this work privately. Or if you want to join our office, when there's openings, that's an option too. But the more people trained in what we do, the more people out there that are able to help families and that could really use the support.
Yes. Thank you guys so much for being here. I truly am appreciative of this conversation. This was amazing. And I look forward to continuing to work with you guys and supporting families. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me.
Co-parenting confessions, you guys. We have finished another episode. Again, don't forget to subscribe. I can't get that word out today. But we want to make sure that you know that this does not have to be a reactionary space. The take home for me today is that you can actually prevent some of the things that you're really afraid of. So it is okay to reach out for family mediation or to speak with an attorney and just find out what your options are. Because as long as you have options, you have some choices. Bye-bye.
MBC. No relation to NBC.